Now, a couple of months ago, you may remember we reported on Birmingham City Council going bankrupt. Now, Birmingham was one of the largest local authorities in the country. So, them going bust was pretty significant, pretty damn significant. And at the time, of course, Michael Gove was in charge. And the story had been spun at the time by the government that the whole reason they had been gone bust, or the reason they had gone bust, was because they had been doing all these equal pay dispute payments that had been going out. Turns out, shockingly, that might not have been true. Shock horror. The last Conservative government not telling the truth about the full scale of, financial information going on. Imagine my shock. Imagine my shock at hearing this. And instead, and we're going to have a look at this piece in a moment. Instead, it now turns out what might have been the biggest cause for Birmingham going, bust is that they were in the middle of implementing a brand new IT system, not by Fujitsu. At least I don't think it was by Fujitsu. And the failures and overcosting and extra, all the stuff that went involved in that, because remember, Birmingham, massive local council authority. So getting a new IT system there is pretty expansive and pretty expensive as well. Turns out that might have had more to do with them going bust than the story that was spun that it was all to do with these equal pay disputes. So, before we go finding more about what went on in Birmingham and why, again, you should not be blaming these equal pay disputes, and if anything, blaming more of that new IT system that they had to put in place, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there's the Buy Me Coffee link where you can, buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button. And of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on over then to this in The Guardian with the title of Birmingham's Going Bust. But here's why everything you've heard about, that is wrong. So let's go recover the ground for you then. So Birmingham City Council declared itself effectively bankrupt in September of last year. But only now are the facts about what really happened beginning to emerge. In a series of monumental problems and errors, including a botched implementation of a new IT system and the likely overstated equal pay liability and a disastrous financial package imposed on the council by the last Conservative government, may have now paved the way for the largest program of cuts and asset sales yet of any local authority. So again, turns out once we get the full picture, once we look at the thing, what was really going on here, turns out not what was being claimed at the time. So it continues. This, of course, was far from inevitable. When the council officers issued the Section 114 bankruptcy notice last September, it identified a looming set of equal pay claims as the primary cause for the council's financial distress. 2 weeks later, Michael Gove, the then Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, told Parliament that it was, quote, independent auditors' assessments that this equal pay and liability was probably at least £760 million and could be much higher, and that the council did not have enough money to cover this. But, and there is a but here, it is not as simple as he made it seem. Yes, the council is in real financial difficulty. The cost and launch of the new Oracle IT system, COVID, austerity, and the cost of living crisis all left Birmingham Council now with rising costs and falling income. But the council's external auditors claim that they did not audit the 760 million equal pay figure that has since been given as the main reason for the council's bankruptcy. We also know that the figure was probably overstated. and that the auditors didn't even have access to the model on which it was based. And what's happened since now raises even more troubling questions. So let's find out more about what went on here, because to me, this does raise, I think, a lot of questions now. It raises a lot of questions. And one of the things you'll see at the moment is that the cuts that the Birmingham City Council had to implement has actually had to lead them to spending more on the problems that those cuts have caused. Because as we always know, and we always learn, that guess what? Spending money on trying to preventively solve a problem is far, far cheaper and better than solving a problem when it has already happened. Turns out you're going to spend a lot more money when that is the case. But of course, that's not conservative thinking. So, as the auditor of Reform Lab has found out in a new recent report, triggering the bankruptcy notice and the subsequent program of cuts that followed is now having disastrous effects. First, linking the bankruptcy to probably the overstated equal pay figure has now forced the council into selling off over £750 million worth of public assets at knockdown prices, including land and housing stock in Broadsley Park and Perry Bar for hundreds of millions of pounds below market value. And these assets are being sold at now substantial losses to pay for a liability that, by the Commission's own assessment, will not be as large as the council had anticipated. Worse still, we have found that basing the current crisis plan on the cost of the equal pay claim did nothing to actually address the council's mounting deficits. Put simply, the equal pay liability was not based on any actual cash costs to the council in the short or even medium term. Removing this figure from the budget, therefore, did nothing to actually address the council's immediate shortfall. Basing the plans on the Oracle costs and on that, on the other hand, would have then removed tens of millions of pounds in real short-term costs, such as consultants, temporary staff, council tax write-offs, and more from the budget, even eliminating the need to make these devastating cuts. So it turns out, as we now see from this, shock horror. And again, I do recommend going and to read the full list, because it goes into more and more questions that should be asked about what's going on this. And I find it really shocking that the council here have been forced into selling assets that they are going to need, like, longer term, like, housing stock and other things that is going to be, if not more difficult and more costly for them to rebuild, getting rid of that. So I find that highly suspicious. I find that why they did not I find it strange that Gove at the time sort of focused on this and made that the key issue, rather than, actually, if you look at it, it was austerity, COVID, and of course the badly implemented IT system that probably far, far more to blame than the equal pay disputes that a lot of Conservatives have now laid at the feet of Birmingham City Council. And remember, at the time, lots of Conservatives were laying into Birmingham, saying, because it's a Labour-run council, it's all their fault. See, this is what happens when you have a Labour council. It's a really, again, filled in, perfectly timed, of course, with, at that time, the upcoming local elections that were about to happen. So will you see more reporting about what really went on here? I don't think so. But this is something I think more questions should be asked about this, and maybe even now revisited. Now looking that we've got a new, person in charge of housing and communities, definitely something that I think should be looked into again. Do Birmingham City Council really need to go so far in this, when, as was stated there, if they were to look at the IT system now, of course they might need the IT system, but maybe scaling back on that for the time being might save them a lot of money, and they might need them not to sell off all those assets, which essentially the council might need a lot later, especially as we saw there, a lot of housing units as well. I think that seems to be incredibly convenient that one of the UK's biggest councils seems to have been forced to sell off thousands and thousands of units of social housing. That seems to be incredibly suspicious by what it was at the time a Conservative government under Michael Gove. Very suspicious indeed. So, as always, let me know what you think below. And of course, as always, do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, as always, I'll see you all next time.